Hey, this is Amal from TechLeatherCraft. I want to show you how to make a custom bracelet, or custom bracelet I just worked on. Basically, the customer had this necklace, and she wanted me to tool it onto a bracelet. I thought I'd just do a video explaining that. So first thing you want to do is make sure your swivel knife is sharp. If you don't know what a swivel knife is, ask me in the comments. I can also do a video on that. Next, I'm marking the holes on the bracelet, and you want to center up where the tooling pattern is going to go, because this is a bracelet. You kind of want it to be on top when the bracelet is snapped shut. So next, you're going to encase the leather. Basically, it involves wetting it and letting it kind of dry out, return to a little bit more natural color. I had marked the center spot. So I taped the pattern onto my marble slab. There's different ways to tape, but this is what I like to do. I like to use a stylus with a point on it. You can also use a ballpoint pen if you don't have anything dedicated to that. I would not recommend using like a scratch awl. I mean, I guess you could, but scratch awl usually will rip through the paper or whatever you're tracing on. So you outline all the lines and transfer the pattern over to the leather. So you can see the faint markings right there on the leather. Next, we're going to cut into it with a swivel knife. You're going to cut in the lines that you traced. And what the swivel knife does is it cuts kind of a V-type groove into the leather. It makes that separation very distinct. So it's not really like a craft knife. The bevel on a swivel knife is just wider, so it kind of parts the leather apart when it's cutting too. Once you have all the cuts done, you're going to start beveling. This can only be done on Veg-Tan tooling leather. There's some other Veg-Tan leathers that are not natural, but they have a dye on them or a finish to them that you can do this on. But the recommended leather to actually carve into leather and tool into leather is vegetable tan leather. You can stamp in other leathers, and sometimes it'll leave a decent imprint, but Veg-Tan is probably the best. So these are my beveling tools I have. I'll be using the other end of my stylus and a couple other bevelers. And the deal with this is you are actually depressing the edge, right, the outside edge. And what that does is it gives the effect of being raised. And I'll just speed this up and I'll cut through it. But you're gonna bevel the lines. Now there's a special technique if you're doing something more complicated, where there was a foreground and background and certain things needed to be dimensional. But in this example, since it's the simple kind of a one-dimensional image, nothing needs to be necessarily in the foreground or background, you can bevel in any kind of order. If you were doing something like a landscape or something that had dimensional, you would start beveling the background first and then work your way up to what would be the foreground. It just looks a little more aesthetically pleasing, and the foreground then has more of a raised surface. But in this example, there is no foreground necessarily or background. It's just a simple image. I've done a couple of these. I am not the best tooler in the world, but anyway, you can see right here, if I held at an angle, you can see that it's kind of a raised surface. So next, we're going to bevel the edges. Since this is a bracelet, you want it to fit nicely on the wrist, not have any sharp edges. You wet the edges down and you bevel it. Now, I'm not going to burnish it, and the reason right now is that if you burnish the edges, it seals the edge, and the problem with that is when it comes time to dye, the dye won't soak in. So I actually burnish after I've dyed, and I actually do 2 coats. So I start with the back, get it in there nicely, and then make sure I get all the edges dyed. You want the dye to kind of soak in, and then we'll start in the front. When you're doing the front and you have tooling on there, be sure to get it in all the grooves and the cuts you've made. I actually do about 2 or 3 passes with the dye, depending on the dye I'm using, and just to make sure it gets all nicely soaked in there. So you can see it actually looks really wet right now. And I'll do one more coat on the back, just to be sure. Anyway, we're gonna let that sit and dry. I actually let this sit overnight just to let the dye soak in, penetrate, and have it and be nice and dry. Then I use a cloth to kind of burnish and take off any residue, because there is black dye residue that kind of forms. So I just use a cloth to kind of buff off the excess dye that's not set yet. Now we're going to burnish the edge. And basically, you wet it down a little bit. And the deal with this is another property of vegetable tan tooling leather, is you can actually get a nice smooth burnish, and the effect you want is kind of have a glossy shine to it. What you're doing is you're creating a nice smooth surface, Also feels nice against the skin, but it also seals the edge. So if you get it wet or whatever, the water doesn't soak into the leather. One other thing you notice is I actually dye the back of my leather and I also finish it with a top coat. I see a lot of bracelets that are natural on the back. If you do leave it natural, be sure to still put a coating over it that waterproofs it, because otherwise what ends up happening is if you get it wet, especially on a bracelet that's on your wrist, if you get it wet, the leather will soak in water from the backside that is not finished. So I like to actually dye and clear coat, finish my leather on both sides, especially on a bracelet, because that's kind of important. I don't always do that on other items, but on a bracelet that's on your wrist, it's really important. So this is the finished bracelet. I just attached 2 snaps to each side. This is about 1 3/4 inch. Anyway guys, if you're interested, you can always order a bracelet from me. I do custom work. Hopefully the video helps. If you're interested in other work, subscribe to my channel. I'll have more stuff coming up soon. Thanks for watching.